Before we get to Iran, let's talk more about the curfew that's imposed in Los Angeles in my own backyard.
6th day in Los Angeles last night, LA Mayor Karen Bass declared a curfew for one.
So much of the fucking right wing, so much of the right wing sentiment revolves around, I don't know this information, and now it's your problem.
For a mile of the city's downtown, citing what she called widespread vandalism, as California Governor Gavin Newsom condemned President Trump's deployment of the military as a brazen abuse of power.
Our chief White House correspondent, Mary Bruce, is standing by with more on the president's response to the situation in L.A. But first, our chief national correspondent, Matt Gutman, starts us off with the latest on the ground there. Good morning, Matt.
Hey, good morning, Robin. This is the first curfew in downtown Los Angeles since the George Floyd protests. And the protests that began here on Friday against the crackdown on immigration by the Trump administration, as you both mentioned, now spreading nationwide as Governor Gavin Newsom with a broadside against President Trump, calling the deployment of those federal troops behind me a brazen abuse of power. Overnight, the protests, which have rocked downtown Los Angeles, spreading across the country in response to the Trump administration's immigration crackdown.
Hands off our students!
From Boston, Seattle, and D.C. to Milwaukee.
No Trump! No ICE! No fascist USA!
In Chicago, a car driving through a group of demonstrators. In New York City, police and protesters clashing, officers pushing protesters back. While the majority of protests have been peaceful, in Los Angeles, for a fifth consecutive night, mounted police officers swarming protesters as that curfew kicked in. Governor Gavin Newsom claiming Tuesday that democracy is under assault, requesting a federal court block President Trump's unprecedented military mobilization.
Donald Trump's government isn't protecting our communities. They're traumatizing our communities.
LA Mayor Karen Bass issuing a curfew for downtown LA that could last several days, hoping it'll stop vandalism and looting of businesses.
Law enforcement will arrest individuals who break the curfew, and you will be prosecuted.
But protesters continue to pour into the streets of downtown LA. The LAPD has allowed several hundred protesters here to meander pretty freely right down the streets of downtown Los Angeles for several hours now. The one thing they have not allowed them to do, descend down to the 101 freeway. And when hundreds of protesters briefly blocked traffic on the 101, police pounced. Late Tuesday, we spoke with LAPD Chief Jim McDonnell. Do you need the help from the thousands of federal troops?
No, they're on a separate mission. Our mission.
You don't need their help, is what you're saying.
We have a protocol in place for doing what we're doing today, and that's we mobilize the department or parts of the department. We've done that, and then to request mutual aid. We did that last night. We brought in members of 14 different police agencies from throughout Southern California. They are supplementing our officers out in the field, doing a variety of different assignments, but crowd management and crowd control is a big part of that.
Later, a demonstrator telling me that one of her family members was taken by ICE while at the grocery store.
They don't say anything. They don't call family, let anybody know what's going on. You just got to find out in the news if your loved one's missing.
LA's police chief also telling me that we are not likely to see Marines and National Guards interacting with protesters out on the streets here of Los Angeles. He said that will remain the jurisdiction of local law enforcement. But Governor Greg Abbott of Texas announcing late last night that he is deploying the National Guard to multiple locations across Texas to handle anticipated protests there. George.
Okay, Matt, thanks.
The heart of Los Angeles is tonight under a curfew. Those who are there are barred from being on the streets, but already a number of people have been arrested for defying that order. And the ill feeling is spreading. Protests now taking place all over America.
Los Angeles locking down as other parts of America fire
News.
up.
Australia's very own non-news. Our correspondent was shot in clashes with the police and the protesters. Fucking hell. Non-news Australia. Or no, I said.
New York streets filled with fury at US Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Further chaos in Chicago, where hundreds marched in solidarity. This car driving through the crowds, protesters scrambling out of its path. From Atlanta to Boston, anger over deportations is ripping across the United States.
It's unjust, it's very disgusting and rancid.
In LA, this is day 5. Emotions still running high.
It's
up what's going on right now. People are being ripped away from their families. You know, it's disgusting.
That passion met with a show of power. Demonstrators lined up and detained. Not to be deterred, protesters took over the freeway. But didn't last long. Many were round up and carted off. For others, the game of cat and mouse continued.
We do not follow orders under Donald Trump.
But they had to follow this order.
I have declared a local emergency and issued a curfew for downtown Los Angeles to stop the vandalism, to stop the looting.
The gates to the City of Angels shut.
The curfew is about to be enforced, so we invite you to go home. This is a peaceful protest.
Police circling those still on the streets, some on horseback, others armed with batons, clearing out almost 2 square kilometres.
It has just gone 8 p.m. here in downtown Los Angeles. That curfew now officially in place. You can see some of the demonstrators there are leaving, but there are plenty that remain. And the plan from LAPD is to arrest anybody.
They're wearing way better gear now. After the other lady got shot down there, literally right there. Okay? Right there. That's where she got shot, the previous 9 News Australia correspondent.
Who stays inside that exclusion zone.
And that's exactly what happened.
This anarchy will not stand. We will not allow federal agents to be attacked, and we will not allow an American city to be invaded and conquered by a foreign enemy.
As Marines arrived in Los Angeles, the man who ordered them in oversaw a military demonstration in North Carolina.
Very simply, we will liberate Los Angeles and make it free, clean, and safe again. It's happening very quickly.
The Commander-in-Chief's decision to send in the troops is going to cost more than $200 million. California's governor wants the Marines and the National Guard out, but his emergency request to limit military deployment has been denied by the courts for now.
Trump is pulling a military dragnet all across Los Angeles, well beyond his stated intent to just go after violent and serious criminals. His agents are arresting dishwashers, gardeners.
The thing I just simply cannot understand is if Gavin Newsom and Karen Bass understand the escalations from the armed side, creating an environment that provokes response, why don't they comprehend that the LAPD, the LASD, and the CHP, California Highway Patrol, are doing the exact same thing? Because it's not just the National Guard that provokes and engages in violent actions, and then that actually causes retaliation. And then the images that you see of, burning cars or whatever and chaos are all over the timeline. You're doing the same thing with the local law enforcement that is under your employ. This is a major contradiction, and I cannot comprehend how liberals, on the one hand, from afar, will say, oh my God, it's unacceptable that the National Guard is being deployed, which is true, it is unacceptable. Or, oh my God, it's unacceptable that the Marines are going. It's even more unacceptable. You're right about that. But then you don't actually dig deep and try to figure out why it's unacceptable. But Gavin Newsom is openly, and Karen Bass are openly revealing why it's fucked up. Because military presence and the additional escalation in the use of force provokes people into retaliating, never to reach the same standard of the state, but retaliating in also militant fashion. And what's interesting about that, once again, is that they just don't comprehend how the same dynamic exists with the LAPD, the LASD, and the California Highway Patrol, which are so far the only groups with limited response from the federal police. The only groups that have so far caused panic and chaos have been the Los Angeles local police. Okay? The only exception is because this is a federal building. Okay? And right now, the only authority that the Trump admin has with the federalized National Guard is to quote unquote protect federal buildings. Okay. The federalized National Guard and the Marines cannot move beyond the point of protecting, in air quotes, these federal buildings. Okay. This is what they did in Portland as well. There are some groups that can operate in law enforcement fashion as federal law enforcement officers on the streets of Los Angeles, like BORTAC. ICE would be one of those units. Technically, BORTAC in Portland in the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests actually did conduct kidnappings, literally kidnappings. But the only people that are the only groups that are currently directly pushing these protesters are the Los Angeles Police Department, the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, and the California Highway Patrol. Beyond that, federalized, the National Guard being federalized is because the federal government has sanctioned or caused the National Guard to be deployed, not the state government. Under normal circumstances, the National Guard is supposed to be brought in and deployed by the state. The last time that the National Guard was deployed against the wishes of the governor was in Alabama with LBJ. And even then, what they can do legally is limited. They have to, yes, LeBron James chat. What they can do is limited to protecting federal agents or protecting like, I don't know, senators or whatever, like federal assets, agents, which is precisely the reason why currently the National Guard that is armed with lethal weapons are either A, stationed at these federal buildings, or participating in the ICE raids alongside ICE agents who are federal law enforcement agents. But with the exception of the federalized National Guard conducting raids, their response to the protesters have been relatively limited, with the exception that I pointed to. Aldım hepsini. Aldım. Yok. With the exception that I noticed on stream, where they were shooting from above the fucking rooftop of the federal building at the crowd, which they were not supposed to be doing. Newsom is blaming Trump for escalations, which is true, except most of the escalations directed at protests have come from LASD, LAPD, and CHP. So far, the federal LEOs, National Guard, are only stationed at federal buildings / and as of this morning, deployed alongside ICE on raids. So when you see, and I know there's like a little bit of misinformation about this stuff, because like the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department, most of the fucking local law enforcement also are so geared up that they look like fucking military because they're so heavily militarized. So I understand why people are a little bit confused. And the Los Angeles Sheriff Department's fatigues are the same color almost as the National Guard, even though it's not. National Guard has camo. LASD has like the sand colored fatigues. So people get confused when they see the Sheriff's Department actually doing violent shit, and they think, oh, it's the National Guard. They're like brutalizing people. That's not the case. This isn't to say that they won't, but so far they have not. What is this? Big news. Judge says Mahmoud Khalil cannot be detained or deported based on Rubio's determination. Holy shit. I'm literally speaking to their legal team, I believe either tonight or tomorrow. This man is going to be released by the time we actually end up having a direct conversation with him, which is great. Amazing. I'd love to interview him as a free man. Incredible news. We'll talk about that further in a second.
Day laborers and seamstresses. That's just weakness. Weakness masquerading as strength.
Further splitting apart these divided states of America. In Los Angeles, Reed Butler, 9 News.
I have declared a local emergency and issued a curfew for downtown Los Angeles.
They were told they'd be arrested if they were on the streets past 8 p.m, and yet still they marched. On this, the 5th day of protests in Los Angeles, the mayor announced a curfew for a small part of downtown, the latest chapter in this battle between state officials and the president over who's in control and how widespread the damage is.
It is extremely important to know that what is happening in this 1 square mile is not affecting the city. Some of the imagery of the protests and the violence gives the appearance as though this is a citywide crisis, and it is not.
The LA Police Department said they'd made 197 arrests on Tuesday. Throughout the day, officers marshaled and pushed back protesters. The majority have been peaceful, but on Monday night, 23 businesses were looted, prompting the curfew. With police appearing to control the situation, the question once again is whether the presence of federalized National Guard and 700 active US Marines is necessary on the streets of LA. With the cost of their deployment more than £100 million, the governor of California called it a waste of money, as he filed an emergency motion to block the president from expanding the powers of the National Guard.
He again chose escalation. He chose more force. He chose theatrics over public safety. He federalized another 2,000 Guard members. He deployed more than 700 active U.S. Marines. These are the men and women trained for foreign combat, not domestic law enforcement.
As the governor spoke, Donald Trump was on the other side of the country watching US troops in action at Fort Bragg, soldiers preparing for wars abroad, although the president claimed there was a battle at home too, as he defended his response to the LA protests.
Generations of Army heroes did not shed their blood on distant shores only to watch our country be destroyed by invasion and third world lawlessness here at home, like is happening in California. As Commander-in-Chief, I will not let that happen. It's never going to happen. What you're witnessing in California is a full-blown assault on peace, on public order, and on national sovereignty carried out by...
Remember when I talked about how insane it was that, like, the soldiers were cheering on the president in full gear at Fort Bragg, and they were booing like previous presidents and shit? It turns out they actually literally went through the crowd to make sure that it was all Trump supporters. They were fucking hand selected, dude. Insane. Okay? They screened them for Trump loyalty.
By rioters bearing foreign flags with the aim of continuing a foreign invasion of our country. We're not going to let that happen.
This event was meant to mark the 250th anniversary of the US Army. But the president's use of the military optics to tout his political agenda is why so many Democrats and other critics are sounding the alarm about how far Trump wants to push his powers.
This isn't just about protests here in Los Angeles. When Donald Trump sought blanket authority to commandeer the National Guard, he made that order apply to every state in this nation. This is about all of us. This is about you. California may be first, but it clearly will not end here. Other states are next. Democracy is next. Democracy is under assault before our eyes. This moment.
This part is correct, though. This part is correct for Gavin.
Has arrived.
That fear has filtered to other cities and other states. In Chicago, hundreds turned out on the streets in solidarity. Scuffles broke out, with some dragged away by police. These demonstrations are not just about the use of the military by President Trump, but sweeping immigration raids across the country, with those in large democratic cities believing they're being deliberately targeted by the administration. Hence, people have protested in Philadelphia, New York City, and here in Atlanta. Texas has also seen disturbances in the capital, Austin, and Dallas. But these are Democrat cities in a deeply Republican state, and the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, has said he will deploy the National Guard to, quote, use every tool and strategy to help law enforcement maintain order. That's different to California, where the governor never called up the National Guard, the president did. It seems clear that while these protests are about immigration policy and the powers of the president, it's now also a political dispute about who runs their cities and states better.
It's really an interesting time in America and in American politics. Republicans are
yeah, that's fucking one way to put it, dipshit.
Are governing well, and we are delivering on our promises, and we are bringing solutions, and we're working around the clock every day to make sure that that is delivered for the people as we promised them last year on the campaign trail. Meanwhile, Democrats are engaging in the applause of destruction of cities and all sorts of chaos. The contrast is so clear, and everybody can see it.
With parts of LA under curfew, 700 Marines to be deployed on Wednesday, Texas now sending in their National Guard, and more protests planned over the coming days, this is a crucial moment in Donald Trump's second term. It is a test of his presidential power and his mandate, and whether Republicans or Democrats win this argument about immigration, law and order, and democracy.
To some extent, people do like to see some action happening. They're glad to see, an activist president after what we've had for the last several years. Does he have a tendency to take that too far? Absolutely.
Dude, these guys drop the fucking ball, Channel 4. When it comes to American politics so hard, it blows my mind. Why are you asking a Republican advisor about Trump's actions? Yes, he's a fucking Liverpool fan. Great. But it's so stupid. Like, yeah, of course he's going to be like, yeah, he sometimes gets a little heavy-handed, but, his fascist takeover is actually really popular. It's not. It's not popular at all.
I am convinced that if Donald Trump would settle for 90% of what he wants, he would be hugely successful and pretty popular. The fact of the matter is that's not who he is as a person or a politician, and he insists on trying for 125% of what he wants. If you look at what's happening with illegal immigration, people absolutely support closing down the borders. They absolutely support deporting criminals, especially violent criminals. They are not so excited about someone coming into, a high school graduation or a court hearing and taking up people who have, for the most part, live their lives here pretty peacefully and productively. So he does have a tendency to overplay his hand. It's interesting because so much of it depends on how the protesters, and in some case rioters, play this out over the course of the next week. To the extent that he's calling in the National Guard because property is being set on fire, people are absolutely going to support him. If the protesters would limit themselves to a peaceful march through downtown LA, and he still, called in the Marines, called in the National Guard, then it would be a very different situation. 5 minutes from now, we could find out that there was a violent clash.
What are you talking about? That's literally what happened, and that's what's been going on. And he still deployed the fucking Marine Corps. That is what he did. What are you saying? I'm sorry, dude. If you're a fucking booker for Channel 4, you're a goddamn moron. This is not journalism. You do not have to defend the Trump administration. I thought liberals had a fucking backbone, a spine. Channel 4 is offering worse coverage on American domestic issues than it does when it comes to Israel-Palestine. How is that even possible? You did? Yes. Yes, I did. The reason for why is because under normal circumstances, like liberal institutions, especially in fucking Europe, hate Donald Trump for at least like being aesthetically a fascist and disrupting. They aesthetically hate Donald Trump, for disrupting the liberal order.
Between protesters who to that point have been peaceful and the National Guard, in which case opinion might turn against President Trump. But one of his big mandates was to deal with illegal immigration. And while he may not do it the way, sort of the sensible middle in the US would prefer, he does have a mandate to deal with it. To the extent that there's, violent attempts to stop him from doing it, people will support his actions. The devil's going to be in the details over the course of the next week or two.
Going to begin with that in Los Angeles. You know by now what's happening there. The mayor has put a curfew in place downtown last night just to try and stop the violent protest against President Trump's immigration crackdown. The LAPD announced it was initiating mass arrests. In the meantime, thousands of people marched peacefully. Peacefully is a word here in other cities, including Dallas, Chicago, San Francisco, and right here in New York. Jonathan Bigliotti's in downtown LA for us covering the story. He spoke with the city's police chief about the thousands of troops that President Trump sent to his city. Jonathan, good morning. Very curious to hear what the chief had to say.
Yeah, and good morning to you, Gail. The police chief saying that the National Guard staged behind me at no point since they arrived here on the ground provided assistance to the city with these protests. There is a curfew in effect. It remains in effect this morning, and it has been effective. Much calmer overnight than previous nights. The LAPD confirming dozens of people were arrested.
No, I thought this too, but turns out National Guard troops in Los Angeles have temporarily detained civilians before turning them over to law enforcement, which is, I'm fairly certain, not legal. National Guard can offer federalized National Guard can offer aid to federal agencies when they're conducting these raids. Now, the raids themselves are immoral, unconscionable, unjustifiable, illegal. Sure. Okay. But if you're looking at the letter of the law, technically, as far as I understand, federalized National Guard units can offer protection to federal agents. ICE are federal agents. So they can partner with ICE and go on these raids to offer protection to ICE. However, the National Guard cannot detain citizens. The National Guard, unless directed by the state, but the federalized National Guard and the Marines especially cannot detain citizens. They cannot arrest citizens. Arresting is performing law enforcement duties. Okay? An arrest or a detainment is a law enforcement duty. What this suggests is that they are doing something that is illegal, unless Trump declares an insurrection. Under the Posse Comitatus Act, it is illegal for the Army or any, the National Guard would be, as a federalized unit, would be basically the equivalent of the military or the Army in this situation, are now allowed to make law enforcement, any kind of acts that normally would be conducted by law enforcement. That's wrong, bro. The National Guard is outside of every major concert event, and they're definitely able to detain anybody they seem as a threat. That doesn't mean you can fucking walk into a federal building and assume that they can't detain you. They can. And also, what you're describing is state-sanctioned National Guard. What you're talking about is when the state is deploying the National Guard to conduct, to aid and abet the police. I can't speak on your own personal experience. I don't know exactly what it was, but National Guard can aid in crowd control, especially if they've been mobilized by the governor. Yeah, the Posse Comitatus Act is a law that generally prevents the president from using the military as a domestic police force.